Thanks for being a panelist.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. I'm excited. I tell everyone, whenever Danielle calls, I just say it.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to Philadelphia 250's Leave a Legacy public call for ideas launch event. I'm Sheila Hess, and I am so proud and humbled to serve as Philadelphia City Representative, as well as a proud Philadelphia 250 board member. So on behalf of Philadelphia 250, I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us here at the Center for Architecture and Design, and thanks for hosting. And to those of you who are watching virtually, hi! How great does it feel to be together in person, even though it is a hybrid model? For those of you attending in person, it's just great to see your faces. I know you're smiling underneath those masks, but to be able to be together again and to network and to bring out those business cards, it's a wonderful feeling, and thank you to Philadelphia 250 for bringing this event together. There's so much energy in the room. We are incredibly energized to have so many people here and online, the organizations, the teams that are interested in actually learning more about how to leave a legacy public call for the bold ideas and the innovations for positive and lasting impact on all of our own neighborhoods. So no matter how you found out about today, we are grateful that you decided to register, because we are in for an exceptional discussion with our great panelists here today. It's the solutions that are generated from this call for ideas that will be Philadelphia's legacy projects to commemorate the 250th anniversary of American independence in 2026. So, start thinking now of what you want Philadelphia to be in 2026. I know you're saying today's only February 16th of 2022, but we all know how fast time flies, and 2026 will be here in the blink of an eye. Therefore, we need to start planning now, and we are. And that's thanks to our passionate Philadelphia 250 leader, Danielle DiLeo Kim, and her dedicated team and board. So, we want to say a big, heartfelt thank you to all the representatives of the Legacy Leaders Task Force, which is a collaboration of over 40 different corporate, community, and higher educational organizations supporting Leave a Legacy with their thought leadership. And we are so grateful for the time, your resources, your expertise. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, to kick off this opening event of Leave a Legacy, we are thrilled to have some of Philadelphia's best, boldest, and brightest minds here with us today, right in front of me. So, they're going to share their perspectives on new ways to recognize major national anniversary milestones and discuss how our city, the city of brotherly and sisterly love, can serve as a national model for such commemorations. Following today's conversation, please stay right where you are to participate in the actual Leave a Legacy workshop. To learn more about the call submission process, how to begin your application, and just help us spread the word about Philadelphia 250. So, for those of you joining online, visit www.philadelphia250.us for more details, important dates, and to connect with the submission team. Now, we are ready to get started? Yes, let's get the session started. And it is my pleasure to turn it over to Roxanne Patel Shepelavey, who is the executive editor from the Philadelphia Citizen, to begin today's conversation, who will serve as our moderator, and who did a great article talking about today's event. So thank you, Roxanne. Let's kick it off, and time to have some fun. Thank you so much. Go Philly 250.
Thanks, Sheila. Can you all hear me? Hello? Says it's on. Can you hear me now? Yes? Good. That now I'm actually saying that live and in person, which is crazy since I've said it basically for 2 years on Zoom. Hi, welcome. As Sheila said, I'm Roxanne Patel Shepelavey. I'm an executive editor and co-executive director of the Philadelphia Citizen. For those of you who are not familiar with the Citizen, that's our logo. And we are a nonprofit media outlet that focuses on solutions to problems in Philadelphia and on increasing civic engagement. So our aim is to give Philadelphians the tools to become change makers in their city, and to really revive citizenship and democracy in the American city where it was born, here in Philadelphia, which is a really good segue to this conversation about Philadelphia at its 250th anniversary. So before I introduce these incredible people here, I'll just tell you a little bit about how this is going to go. As Sheila mentioned, after our conversation, we will depart the stage, and there'll be a workshop to talk about how to apply for the Leave a Legacy program. When I'm done asking some questions here, we will open it up for the audience to ask questions, online and in person. Somebody will walk around with a mic so that the people watching at home will also be able to hear you. So without further ado, these are all the kinds of people that we love to write about at the Citizen. I'm going to start down there. Tya, who is wearing Citizen pink accidentally. She is executive director of the Community Design Collaborative, which provides pro bono preliminary design services to nonprofits in Greater Philadelphia, creates engaging volunteer opportunities for design professionals, and raises awareness about the importance of design in revitalizing communities. Tya is a trained architect who was previously director of project planning and design for Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia. She has a deep commitment to using design as a way to tackle social justice issues. Cathy Cahill is president and CEO of the Mann Center for the Performing Arts, where she has expanded the venue's programming to include new commissioned works, non-traditional artist pairings, and improved education programs. She is also a trained cellist, which is very cool, and has served as an adjunct professor of music at the Manhattan School of Music and at Drexel in their Graduate Arts Administration program. Paul M. Farber is a scholar and author and currently director of Monument Lab, for which in 2019 he co-edited a public art and history handbook for Philadelphia designed to generate new critical ways of thinking about and building monuments. Under his direction, Monument Lab's research team spent a year scouring almost 500,000 records of historic public and institutional properties around the country, analyzing 50,000 conventional monuments to help us understand how we have honored history in America. Paul's research and curatorial projects, an easier word to write than to speak, have explored transnational urban history, cultural memory, and creative approaches to civic engagement. And to my immediate left is Danielle DiLeo Kim, who most of you should know, and if you don't, here she is. She's executive director of Philadelphia 250, the nonprofit that has brought us all together, whose mission is to make Philadelphia the centerpiece of the country's 250th anniversary celebration in 2026. An architect and urban designer by training, she spent much of her career delivering transformational urban development projects for city agencies, nonprofits, and developers, with an emphasis on public realm improvements. So I would like to start with Danielle to tell us a little bit about Philadelphia 250 and the Leave a Legacy project. What's the aim of both?
Sure. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for coming out, for being in person, and hello to all of you who's listening in online. Philadelphia 250 is the coordinating entity for the 250th anniversary of America that will take place in 2026, and we're doing so for the city of Philadelphia. Our approach is really a by the people, for all people model, which means that we are engaging everyone at a grassroots level. We intend for there to be opportunities across the whole city and really rooted in neighborhoods. So as a coordinating entity, one of our major roles is to make sure that we're bringing people together and that there are welcomed opportunities for people to get engaged, such as what we're doing today. Additionally, we're developing some of our own programs that we're particularly excited about. On your chair, if you're here, you'll see a postcard with something called Dare to Declare, which is an initiative around civic engagement and asking folks to imagine a future for Philadelphia and for themselves in 2026. A second platform we're working on is called Share Your Story, and that's about making sure we're telling inclusive, contextual, and true stories of American history and Philadelphia history. And then the third platform is what we're here today to talk about, which is Leave a Legacy. And that is really grounded in this idea of that the legacies and the decisions that we make today can be really about making Philadelphia a stronger and more thriving and equitable city in 2026 and beyond. And all of that really comes together to seize the moment. 2026 happens only every 50 years. This is the next big opportunity for Philadelphia. So our goal is to leverage the 250th anniversary to be an opportunity and a catalyst to create the most inclusive and transformational anniversary in American history. And that's a pretty big goal, and we know that it is. But Philadelphia has always played a leading role in all of the previous anniversaries. So starting in 1876, with the Centennial Exhibition, Cathy Cahill is going to tell us a little bit about that and that legacy landscape and the amazing things that came out of 1876. 1926, the sesquicentennial was held in FDR Park in South Philadelphia, and even the Benjamin Franklin Bridge was built and opened to traffic and travel on July 1st of 1926. And then 1976 was less of a place-based experience in Philadelphia, but there were still major monuments and buildings that were left and created to mark that milestone, such as the Mann Center for the Performing Arts, the African American Museum of Philadelphia, and then the iconic Love sculpture and also the iconic clothespin sculpture. So with Leave a Legacy for 2026, we're trying to kind of turn things on its head a little bit and to use Leave a Legacy as an opportunity to ask the public, what do you want to see for 2026? So this is a public call for ideas and innovations about leaving a lasting legacy at a neighborhood level for 2026. So specifically, we're asking for ideas around what we refer to as social and civic infrastructure, which essentially means what are the assets, the resources, and the systems that need to be in place to make sure that neighborhoods thrive and they're not merely surviving. So, for example, we're hoping that some of the ideas that come out of this Leave a Legacy call could be things potentially around affordable housing or the renovation and the rehab of existing row homes to make them safer, warm, dry, and where people can really grow in their families. Perhaps there's going to be ideas around public health. I mean, we're sitting here in the midst of a pandemic, and with the innovation of vaccines, we're all able to gather here today. What innovation is potentially out there around public health? Perhaps there are ideas around education, and then, in terms of the public realm, how can we make sure our streets are clean, safe, and green for the future as well? So that's our idea. The decisions and the investments that we make now in 2022, they chart our future, and they set the path, and they will be the legacy of what this city will look like in 2026.
Great. So let's take it back a minute, and Cathy, I'd like you to do that for us and talk a little bit about, you're the steward of the Mann Music Center, which, as Danielle pointed out, was built for the bicentennial. Is that correct? Yeah, 1976. So tell us a little bit about sort of, what it is, what the Centennial District is, where the Mann Music Center is, and what that means to Philadelphia, and kind of what you're thinking about for this year.
Great, thanks so much. Thank you, first of all, Sheila, for the warm welcome to everybody, and thanks, Roxanne, for great questions, and Danielle for inviting myself on behalf of the Mann Center and my colleagues in the Centennial District to be here today. I always have to ask this, and I know I can't see the folks online, but everybody here today, how many of you have been to the Mann Center? Oh, that's the right answer. Thank you very much. I don't have to explain too much about us because there's some pictures up there. Right answer, thank you. So, you're hearing about legacy. I mean, if that isn't the hallmark for Philadelphia, both past and future, I don't know what is, from 1776 right down the street here, frankly, to 1876, which I'll talk about in a moment, to 1976 when we landed where we are now at 52nd and Parkside in the Centennial District. The Centennial District, I have to tell you, I think is still one of the best kept secrets for many, many people who don't know that much about what happened here. And it's an extraordinary story of innovation and exploration. 1876 was where America celebrated her first 100th birthday. And we competed with other cities at the time, and there's a long history in how we ended up getting it at where we are now. And it was basically a World's Fair. It was a World's Exhibition. And it was there for over 6 months, hundreds and hundreds of acres. 1 out of every 4 Americans came for this World's Fair, this World's Exposition, which was focused on innovation. 2 of the largest buildings in the world were actually built for this World's Fair, this exposition. Our own beloved Memorial Hall, which is where our world-class Please Touch Museum is a testimony to the Beaux-Arts architecture of that era. It's quite magnificent. There's one other little building left still standing from that celebration, and that's called the Ohio House. It looks like a little gingerbread house on the corner of Montgomery and Belmont, if you're familiar with it, in West Fairmount Park. It was an amazing 6-month celebration. It truly was. I always remind myself the 3 T's happened there. The telephone was championed by Bell, and apparently it stole the show. Everything else became sort of second to that. But the telephone was premiered there. The telegraph was another major presentation of innovation. And the typewriter, although the typewriter existed, it wasn't selling very well. So Remington brought his typewriter there, and many, many people saw it for the first time. And I don't have to tell you about how the typewriter revolutionized, along with the other major things I've talked about. First monorail ever built happened at the Centennial celebration. Hires Root Beer. We all know Hires Root Beer, right? Hires Root Beer was designed by a Philadelphia chemist, presented and first debuted at the Centennial celebration. Heinz Ketchup, also first time. Bananas, who knew about bananas? Bananas were considered an oddity and a rarity. They were served in tin foil with forks and spoons, and they were sold for 10 cents a pop. Some actually interesting people also attended. George Westinghouse, as in the electrical giant of GE, the founder of GE, came as a young man. So did George Eastman, as in Eastman Kodak, got their inspiration as young people coming to that World's Fair. So there's many, many other things to share and explain that happened there, but it was really an extraordinary time for our city. For those musicians in the room, actually Richard Wagner was commissioned, a great German composer, to write an overture. Apparently it wasn't very good, but nevertheless he was commissioned to write a work. And it's an extraordinary history. You can see some images up there of what the property looked like. The anchor institutions that still exist in this footprint, in this magnificent historical Centennial District, are of course the Please Touch Museum in the Centennial Hall, which, by the way, please go there. They have a life-size model. It's about half the size of this room, and I kid you not, of the actual entire Centennial physical setup. You can see all the buildings. You can see everything that was built. It'll blow your mind. And they've done a beautiful job renovating it, so I highly encourage you to go. Also, the Philadelphia Zoo is also in this footprint, America's oldest zoo. It's only a mile from where we are. And the Mann Center sits right smack dab in the middle of where this great celebration occurred. which harkened beautifully to 1976, another milestone moment, again, for the American bicentennial. Now, the concert series that you all know at the Mann Center, as we know it where it physically sits now, actually originated across the river, on the other side of the river at Strawberry Mansion in the late 1930s. And it was known then as the Robin Hood Dell. And that actual building is still there and now run by the City Parks Department. So the history is a long and rich one, and the 50 years that we're looking to celebrate in 2026 for the Mann, where we physically sit now, will be a terrific crossroads from the legacy perspective, celebrating not only the Centennial District and its whole spirit of innovation, but also what the Mann Center's 50th anniversary will allow. So we are going to combine those two and really work together with our partners, both in the Centennial District, but also with Philly 250, and hopefully all the members here who come together to really take a look at what that legacy could look like, and what does that mean for the future, and what can we do together to make Philadelphia a better and stronger place, and emphasize that legacy, focusing on innovation and creativity and inclusiveness.
That's great. So, so it's interesting to me when I was talking to Danielle about what we're thinking about this year, which is not a concrete building or a Beaux-Arts building or any of these bridges, that we're talking about something perhaps less tangible, if it's stories or health, but no less meaningful, of course, and hopefully more meaningful to more people. And Paul, you know, we've spent the last couple years really sort of debating and talking about and pulling down monuments and statues all over the country and leaving them up. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time thinking about what we commemorate and how we commemorate things. And Monument Lab, with their National Monument Audit in particular, really dove into that issue. And so I wanted to find out a little bit from you about some of the lessons that you learned from that, about how we have thought about commemorating things, and really the lessons to take forward from that, what we should do, what was the sort of the good and the bad of how we do these.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Speaking of legacy, it's a great testament for those of us who are here together to also acknowledge the people who have not been able to make it through the pandemic. And just, you know, holding that, while this feels like a reunion of sorts, I just want to register that moment. Of course, we're gathering here at the Center for Architecture and Design, and just across the street is not only the place, the Pennsylvania Convention Center, where many of us were vaccinated in this city, it's also the place in the most recent presidential election where the decisive votes cast were counted, and we're outside. Artists, activists, residents of the city rallied, especially Spiral Q Puppet Theater and the dancing mailboxes, but as a urgent and joyful and incredibly meaningful imprint. And so when I think about legacy, I think about all of those things. And I think about legacy in terms of presence and absence. So Monument Lab is a nonprofit. We're a public art and history studio based in the US and headquartered right here in Philadelphia. In fact, this room was the first place we ever did a public event, a preview of our first exhibition. So it's really great to be back here. We have worked with artists, activists, municipal agencies, cultural institutions, thinking about the past, present, and future of monuments. Along with my colleagues Sue Mobley, Lori Allen, and several dozen others, we completed the National Monument Audit last fall in partnership with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And, you know, from that project, I would say there were main takeaways. One of them is that monuments, while they're central to our cities, to our towns, to our regions, they're elusive because they don't mean any one thing. We might be talking about statues in marble, bronze, put on high. We might be talking about archaeological sites, ecological formations. Sometimes, actually, when we talk about monuments, we're talking about gatherings of people, protests, poetry, projection. We know that if you have the time, the money, and the official power, you build monuments that are important to you and that maintain your place in society. If you don't have the time, the money, the official power, you have power nonetheless. You build your own monuments, or you gather around one's exist to amplify your presence. In the audit, while of course there's a lot of attention on this kind of moment of reckoning, we did find that 99% of monuments over the last 2 years were not taken down. They stand still. We also know a number of other things from this. We know that of the top 50 figures monumentalized in recorded monuments across this country, that there are more Confederates than Black Americans. We know of the top 50, there are 3 women, Joan of Arc as number 1, Harriet Tubman and Sacagawea. There are no U.S.-born Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, or self-identified LGBTQ plus people in that top 50. Last thing I would say about the audit is when you can see this on our website, you can download a free copy, you can get a hard copy through our online store, and you can search the data of nearly 50,000 conventional monuments, 48,178 to be precise. When you type in Civil War, you get close to 6,000 entries. 1% even mention slavery. I'm saying mention. I'm not saying give a full account, represent the stories of formerly enslaved people. I'm saying 1% mention it in the title, in the plaque, maybe even in the notes that people kept around them in historical records. When you type in Confederate, 3% mention defeat. When you type in pioneer, 15% mention Native American, Indian, or indigenous, and I'm not counting the pejorative language in there as well. That is why we came to the conclusion that monuments must change. It is not enough to complete the monument landscape, so to speak, if we do not address harms, erasures in the past. So I want to say that I want to just give us a kind of framework of both kind of purpose and also possibility when it comes to the upcoming anniversary, which is to say that a lot of the work that we're talking about, leaving a legacy, is already happening. It's happening out there in neighborhoods right now. And what I appreciate about this project, and also I want to kind of make sure to remind, is that we're not actually looking for something new necessarily. Innovation is happening already. Breakthrough vision happening already. How do we invest in it? How do we resource it? How do we seek historic erasures as important? Last thing I want to say about the legacy of the events and historic moments is that, around this theme of presence and absence, is that in 1876, not only is this the first big national gathering after the Civil War, it is also one of the last major gatherings before the end of Reconstruction. And the story of racial reconciliation between white, mostly male, but not just, Northerners and Southerners was at the expense of really taking a close look at the legacies of injustice in this country. One of the efforts that was not originally part of the program was among members of the AME Church to address a gap in planning for the 1876 centennial, which was to build a statue to the late Reverend Richard Allen. And this was not something funded by the kind of central organizers. This was something that had to be brought on, added on. There's an elaborate story to it, which was that the statue was made to be close to, if not bigger than, life size. It was meant to be brought in and added to the Centennial Exposition, and there was a train crash along the way, and only the bust had survived and made it to Philadelphia. And in calls to have it extend beyond the exhibition itself, the city and the organizers denied that. That bust went into hiding for a long time. It was in obscurity and was recently, meaning in the last 10 years, rediscovered at Wilberforce University in Ohio and brought back to Philadelphia. So I want to bring that up because as we think about what we are proud of, we also have to reckon with what harms have been done and how do we not just think about inclusion, but legacies of exclusion. Because if we are to think about how we live up to our full creed, how we learn from and labor from the past to make the future better, this goes back to that idea that monuments must change.
Thank you. That was very moving. So I want to pick up on one of the things you said right before the last thing that sort of touches on Tya and on this project, which is that Community Design Collaborative does a lot of this work that Danielle is talking about with Leave a Legacy in neighborhoods, right? Working with people throughout the city to really help shape what their community looks like or what they build in their community, which is different than sort of coming in and saying, this is what you need, we're going to put a park here, we're going to put a library here, we're going to whatever. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that and sort of why that's important, and again, some of what you have found that Philadelphians really want in their neighborhoods that they don't have, and for all the reasons I think that Paul kind of touched on.
Can I go? Okay. Technical difficulties. No, I think that's a really good question. I was reflecting on many things as Paul was talking. So the Community Design Collaborative this year celebrates its 30th anniversary of working in communities in Philadelphia. And it was started by a group of activist architects, a few that are actually in the room today. And those activist architects were really looking to try to use their expertise, their design expertise, to help communities forward their visions. But the organization 30 years ago was also sort of inspired by organizations and activists and movements that had previously existed here in Philadelphia, many of which were started sort of in this building, in this space, philosophically, right? Not physically here, because the AIA was not here at the time. But we have a long history of activism in the design community in Philadelphia. We have a long history of that activism supporting little neighborhood projects, civic movements and projects as well. And I think one thing that really stood out when Philadelphia 250 and Danielle first came to us and asked us to be involved was that idea of by the people, for the people. Oftentimes, communities are left with projects that have been imposed on them, right? I think a lot of our civic practices in the city in the last 10 years have really worked hard to try to reinsert that public voice back into the process. But it's hard, it's belabored, it's difficult on both sides. I think it's difficult for those that are used to doing projects and not having to engage the community. It's difficult for the community that may not be as experienced or have the resources or the wherewithal or the time. I think everyone mentions sort of, do you have the money, do you have the time, do you have the energy to fight all the time things that are happening in their neighborhood? And when you think of that phrase, by the people, right? By the people was the key. And I think oftentimes that's something that gets left out of a lot of big processes, design or not, is going and getting the input, getting the voice, getting the feedback. I've sat on this stage many times and said, the people that live in these communities, they have the PhD in their community, right? There's nothing an expert can come in and tell a person that lives someplace about that land, about that environment that they don't understand, like acutely, right? They know it better than we could ever know it. No statistic will ever come in and undermine that. And so if we're coming in and we're trying to think about how do you leave a legacy, it's really necessary to go in and get that buy-in for multiple reasons. One, as you know, the organizations, many of these projects are going to be completed by cultural organizations, institutions, nonprofit agencies, even my own. And when you're coming into a neighborhood, even if you are, you have some aspects of you that are part of that neighborhood, even if you're focused in your boundaries in that neighborhood, what you're creating is a thing, and I'm saying thing because we don't know what the thing is right now, that you want to be useful, right? You want the people to use it. You want them to embrace it. You want them to engage it and take it on as their own. And that's something that's really hard to do when they don't have a say in the process. That at the ground level is something that often turns people off of your thing. I think, as a designer, especially one trained as an architect, there's many instances as designers where we have our intention for what we think the building is going to be. Has anyone in this room been to a park where there's lots of really nice poured concrete paths, and then there's one dirt path that was obviously not designed, that's treaded down and actively used? That's design, right? You could, the best intentions of how you expect people to use a space, but how it's actually used is its legacy. That's what's left. We cannot control what happens to the thing once we've created it, much like a child, right? You birth it, and then it is up to it to engage the universe and figure out what it's going to be. And I think a lot of times when we think about design with a capital D, it's trying to forever control what that use, what that intentionality is. And that's something that we really can't do. So to have the best buy-in, to have the best results, to have the best usefulness long-term, you really need to engage the end users at the beginning so that once it's done, they take ownership of that thing, and it breathes that life, and it continues to breathe that life. I think also sort of piggybacking on sort of what Paul said also, they say there's an African proverb, and it says that essentially it says, like, as long as the lion does not tell its story, the hunter will always be the hero. And so I think this is one of those moments, given the history that we've had. We have a lot of small neighborhoods in Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods and has historically been that. It has not changed in the almost 300 years, really longer if we think about how long people have settled in the space that we now call Philadelphia. It goes back to, I think, the 1600s. We've always had these small neighborhoods of people. And so I think when we're starting to think about how do you move something forward, what can we do that rallies all of those different neighborhoods around? What can we do as a legacy that sort of remains in those different communities, and gives them something to sort of propel a lot of the thoughts that we're thinking of in the spirit of this 250th anniversary forward?
So can I ask you to give an example, given that we're a city of neighborhoods, are there some themes that have come through regularly when you do work in different neighborhoods? Certain things that people feel are missing and want you to help them with?
I think absolutely. Are there common things? I think equity is always at the top of the list. So much so that as we've entered the 30th year and I've come in as executive director, we're in the process of doing a strategic planning process. And that was the number one thing that kept coming up was how do you create equity across the board in neighborhoods? When we're talking about age, we're talking about creed, you're talking about race, you're talking about ability, right? Economics, how do you create equity in those spaces? And it's not always easy, so much so that we're gonna embed equity across our new mission statement. It's gonna be the base that everything else kind of grows up from. I think we've often seen a desire for community visions to move forward, right? The community wants to come together and then have us sort of help them move their idea forward as opposed to coming in and giving them our idea or telling them what they should do. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've seen is like, how do we, one, kind of harness the energy that they have, and then build the capacity of them to be able to move the projects forward. That is the biggest question and quest that we send when we send our volunteers out into these neighborhoods. And then I think the third is quality of life, right? They're always looking to improve their quality of life on the ground, whether it's a housing project, whether it's a schoolyard project, whether it's an outdoor space. They're always trying to improve a resource that's needed in their community for both the cohesion of their neighborhood, but also the functionality of their livelihood.
That's great. So, Paul, I'm going to come back to you for a minute to talk a little bit. When we spoke a couple days ago, you mentioned that you've started doing some of this work around the country, not necessarily around the 250th, although perhaps, around the 250th. And you kind of mentioned in passing that there are already some takeaways, some sort of things you've seen that would be good to replicate or keep in mind as a positive step forward, and then some things that you think we should avoid. What kinds of things have you seen?
I think in part because of Monument Lab's place in art and history and civic engagement, in this city and others, I've been in conversations with people who are part of the art community, people who are part of the civic engagement community, people who are part of history, and I would imagine there are other, tourism is another one. So I would just want to say that like part of what's going on is a kind of grand coordination, and I think a coalitional approach would be incredibly helpful to say that there actually are important and different constituencies. I also want to say some of the most important legacies of historic events are not scripted. They are from grassroots expressions. And so even if the intention of an institutional approach is to kind of do the work of uplift, I also want to say, like, how do you leave room for interpretation? How do you leave room for new visions? How do you actually also push resources out and do some of that work that Tya is mentioning of learning from folks who have that local knowledge? We worked with state government in the state of New Jersey who have asked Monument Lab to help them think in a long-term way about the American Revolution commemoration. And when we started the work a few years ago, we said, well, 2026, that's a good goal, but will this country hold until then? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that part of what was brought up then, I want to bring up here, is the fragility of democracy, that we're in the midst of an incredible sweep around voter suppression and attacks on democracy. So again, I like to put joy and justice together. I think that this is a city, especially where we're a home for that, but I want us to kind of hold those things really close. Some of the other things, just to kind of close it out, is that for some, the revolution is a historic period to reenact and to honor, and for some, the revolution is still going, is not finished. It is the unfinished project of American democracy. And so how do we strive toward that is key. I'm thinking about, in this city, how are we going to account for Lenape history, which goes back 10,000 years in this area that we now call Philadelphia, a city that was lived in before it was ever founded, right? In a city that has, has kind of honors to William Penn. Harriet Tubman took more trips to Philadelphia than William Penn. Okay, I'm pointing up to City Hall right now. And I think about two people that had a great big influence on me. I want to bring their names and their work into this room. Elaine Buck and Beverly Mills, who are New Jersey-based public historians. We're just down the street from the great Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, where you can see great paintings that kind of tell us about the stories of American history through the eyes of painters. And that vision, whether it's painterly or in reenactment, the story of George Washington crossing the Delaware is an important part of changing the course of history. Elaine Buck and Beverly Mills wrote about black marbleheaders from Massachusetts who helped make that voyage happen. I learned about that after getting a PhD, after going through college, after going through school, and having the luxury to do so. So let's think about the stories that not just could be added on, but really think about how we tell stories, how we value, how we think about resources going out, and where we find meaning. And I think we have to take that not just as like a goal or an add-on. It should be the purpose and the part of what we're doing here.
So I'd like to, I think it's time to, if anybody has any questions, do people have questions? Are there questions anywhere here? Okay, you think about that. And I just wanted to follow up with something that had occurred to me when you all were talking while you guys get ready. So, the thing about having these big buildings or these bridges, right? It's something, the Benjamin Franklin Bridge is something that, every Philadelphian sees and walks across. And at least, around 1976 could be like, hey, that just opened and it's 1976. When you talk about things that are in neighborhoods, how do we make it so that those are for all Philadelphians, right? So how are you going to, people are going to be in this neighborhood and they're going to, how do we make this feel as big as one of these big monuments? I guess that's a question for you, Danielle. Although anybody can answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a challenge that we're gonna face with the way that we've set up this call, right? Because it's not necessarily, we'll see what comes out of the ideas, but there might not be overly tangible things to get your hands on. So we'll have to figure out how we recognize those. One of the things that we're looking to do or working towards as we figure out our plans in 2026 is that You know, this idea of leave a legacy, we're kicking off right now with this call for ideas. But what we're going to eventually be asking is for individuals, organizations that are already working on, to Paul's point, that there's already really amazing stuff that's going on in this city today. But have we actually cataloged it? Is there a way to recognize that? And the potential for celebrating all of that transformational change in 2026 is something that we're thinking about doing as an actual experience in 2026, which is like, come to Philadelphia and see across all of these different sectors, from individuals to universities to cultural organizations, what we collectively have been working on together, and actually recognize that. Maybe it's quantified. Maybe there's an economic development study that talks about all of the work that's been happening. And I don't think that that's ever been done at a city scale. And the idea of like doing that, and that can be Philadelphia's legacy to some point, which is like, we are a leader in this nation that working across all these different sectors, and we've actually shown the progress that's been made. So I don't know that there's going to be real tangible things, but we're going to have a tremendous record of what's been happening over the last few years for 2026.
Okay. Well, I think one thing also to point out is you mentioned all things that were infrastructure, right? Big, iconic, either buildings, bridges that we all can like see. And they're larger than life because you can see them from multiple places, right? That's the only thing that makes City Hall really big, is that everywhere you're standing in the city, you can see City Hall. But I also think that there's this intangible. You and Paul both sort of mentioned these intangible things that happen, that spontaneity. And I think of, for all of this year, last few years that have been compared to like 1968, right? What do people remember? They remember the March on Washington, they remember Woodstock, right? There are these big collections of people. And then there's that anecdote that says, I might not remember what you told me, but I remember how I felt. I think, could that be the legacy, right? Could Philadelphians remember, man, 2026, that's that year. I remember that year because this happened and this happened and this happened, and our city is different because of it. And would that be okay? Is that enough?
Yeah, interesting. That's beautiful. I like the idea that we would, I think we think of 2020 as being that year, but in a way that was difficult, right? It'd be great if 2026 was a year we remembered for being sort of the thing we learned from 2020 and then became this and blossomed into something else, right? Great. Does anybody have any questions? I think somebody did. Oh, yep, a couple of them. Somebody's going to come to you with a microphone.
Oh, okay. Hello. Yep. Can you guys hear me? Cool. Thanks again for today. This has been an amazing panel. I'm looking forward to the workshop. My name is Michelle Gaffney. I am a resident of Old Richmond, so I'm kind of right in the cross section of blue collar industrial communities and communities facing gun violence and trash issues everywhere and et cetera. In addition to rapid gentrification and what some would say overdevelopment, massive demolitions almost every other block, people really feel like their neighborhoods are being erased. And I was just wondering a couple things, specifically off of something you said, Tya, and also Paul, this idea of having to fight all the time, and who has the energy or the time or the resources or the privilege to be able to wade through how to even begin interacting with and impacting the process with the city. I was laid off and at home, and that's why I had time to get involved in it myself. And that's why I was able to look up and look around. And I think a lot of people who had the privilege of working from home or who were unfortunately laid off in the pandemic and stuck at home had an opportunity to breathe, to stop thinking, to look up and see the destruction that was happening around them and how much they didn't recognize their own neighborhoods anymore. So what do you see as the potential or the ability that anyone has to be able to make government processes and changing your neighborhood accessible? And how do you make it so that everyone understands, because government there's a lot of language people don't understand. The barrier to entry is high. How do you invite people in and make sure people have the information they need, even if they have to be working 3 jobs at a time for ungodly hours and feel powerless?
And actually, Tya, this seems like a question for you, but I wanted to sort of point out that you introduced your neighborhood by talking about all of the multitude of problems in the neighborhood, and then also talked about the change in your neighborhood, and so as being a negative, right? But clearly there is a need for change of a certain kind, and a part of the question is, how do you make sure that change, which is needed in so many neighborhoods, doesn't come at the expense of the people who are already in the neighborhoods?
Died. Okay, wait, we're back. All right. Thank you for your time, because that's a lot of work. I've had the privilege in the 10 years I've been in Philadelphia of working in community development. I've stayed because, honestly, as a person in this industry who's now, I guess, considered an expert in this industry, Philadelphia has one of the richest industries around community development, and so much of it is resident driven, which is both exciting as a practitioner and probably also at the same time the challenge a lot of times in doing this work. I think one thing that becomes really difficult is we have a lot of people, and different neighborhoods have different levels of resources. And then some neighborhoods have different levels of, I like to call it potential energy. Some of the neighborhoods that are the hardest hit have the most potential energy, and I think a lot of that has to do with having a population of people who are at home, whether it's, I like to call them the Miss Marys, which I borrow from one of my good friends, on the block, right? There's a lot of Miss Marys on the block that can sit, and they are vigilant town watch, right? They make sure everybody is held accountable. And so I think over the years, we've seen those power dynamics play out. I wish I had a clean answer for you. I don't know that there is a answer. We've had neighborhoods that have already been erased in Philadelphia. I teach a class to my students. I teach both real estate and architecture students, and I literally can't even make political statements. I just tell them the facts, and at the end, all of my students are like the biggest rebel rousers because they're like, "That's not fair," and I'm like, "I don't know how you came to that assumption." It's a hard thing. I think that's actually part of Philadelphia's legacy that we have yet to contend with, is what happens when we've had these shifts and these changes, and so many neighborhoods and so many stories have already been erased and then new neighborhoods popped up. I think it's a hard thing to reckon with, especially when you think of a lot of this happened in really the last 50 to 75 years. The city looks very different in what is almost, one senior elder's lifetime. How do you get those individuals to believe that we're even going to do something different because they've seen it all? And I think that's something that hopefully through some of this process, we can build more cohesion. I think we can help support better power structures in neighborhoods. I do think, I will say over the years, most of the city agencies have been shifting. I know it's hard to see from the outside, but I will say from somebody that's often interacting with people on the inside, bureaucracies in Philadelphia are often big red tape walls, but the people on the inside feel the same as the people on the outside of the wall. So I do think there's opportunities for change and alignment, because most of the city workers are also your neighbors. They also feel the same way. They're also fighting the same things. Some of our machines are just, I hate to use the phrase, too big to fail. But I think the more eyes and the more times that we've come to the fire, you start to see the little things chip away. And I'm hopeful that out of this, I think one thing I have seen that's been successful in the last few years are coalitions. I think the second time it came up today, right? What happens when you can get all those important players in a room around a table working towards a common goal? It's not easy in this city, even though we're brotherly love and sisterly affection. But when it does happen, magic happens. When they're all kind of yes, we all need to kind of move this one thing forward. And so hopefully this becomes one of those moments similar to all of our other big moments in history where we can create this common agenda. I see this launch, and I think one of the reasons I've been so supportive of Danielle in this role is like, can Philadelphia 250 create that common agenda, or at least in this very small space, right, of what this public legacy could be, that people rally around a common goal, and then we can all move together. They say if you want to go far, you got to go together. We got to go together. And how do we do that better? Because then also by being a part of that process, the takeaway and part of that legacy will also be that those community groups and the individuals that participate, they also now have that expertise. They'll be able to then replicate it on smaller scales back in their neighborhoods.
And I will just throw in that they should vote, because a lot of the policies you're talking about are controlled by our public officials. And if we don't get more than 25% of the people voting next year in our mayoral and city council races, then nothing's going to change. Any other questions?
How y'all doing? My name is Leonzo from Global Village. So my question is pretty direct. I'm really curious, how are you guys determining success from this initiative?
That's a great question. I'm going to turn that over to my project manager, Eric DeVera, who's going to tell you about the project, and she'll go into that. Our goal at the end of 2022 is to have a number of legacy projects identified through this process. And we're committing time, resources, and management and promotion for the next few years to make those projects a reality. And we will continue to kind of measure our progress as we go. And thank you for that. And thank you. We will hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we get these things accomplished.
I think we have time for one more question before we cede the stage to Eric.
Thank you. I ask for grace as I stumble through this question. And that is the question, what he just asked. But I think before you can even start to measure success, there's a criteria for selection. And so I'm wondering, how are you eliminating bias of the selection committee from the process? A lot of times we see funding organizations choose which data they find is valuable. And how are you going to mitigate that?
So I think maybe then this is a good time to transition to the workshop, where I think that is exactly the question that Eric will take you through. Do we have any other questions for the panelists before we get to really talking about the nitty-gritty of Leave a Legacy?
I'm used to having a big voice, but with the mask, you never know. I'm thinking about, at the end of Monument Lab, there was an exhibit at PAFA of all of the ideas that people generated. And I think that, as we go toward a conversation of like which thing wins and which thing doesn't, I think that, it seems like part of the side goal of the project is to make an archive of a momentum around this kind of thinking, and I wonder, what kind of compendium. I mean, maybe it's online. I see, how you're submitting your ideas through a web portal, et cetera. But I did appreciate that opportunity to see everyone's drawings and thoughts. As well as whatever, because also, I mean, if in the nitty gritty, I'm sure we'll talk about receive a portion of 125,000, whatever. There's going to be many interesting possible futures that aren't supported in the end, but have gained momentum through the process. So I was just wondering what your thinking about about that sort of community of ideas and how to, bring some light to them regardless of where they go in the process.
Again, that's a perfect question for Eric, who's going to explain that. We are planning an expo to share all of the ideas that come in, and actually their ideas will also be up and available for public viewing, so that we're encouraging ideas to our partnership teams to potentially collaborate with one another. So if you submit part of your idea, certain elements of it will be available publicly if you agree, and then if others who are also thinking of ideas can see, oh, this person has a similar idea, or I should call them, or I should develop their idea. So we are very much about making sure that it's transparent and that we're sharing the ideas as long as people agree to do so. And I want to, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Can I just add something here? And this is, thank you for your comment and for the questions. As someone who is learning about this today for the first time and eager to hear more, I kind of want to just take a step back and say, whether it is Philadelphia 250's work or anyone else in the city or state, it is an opportunity to shift the discourse. And whether it's in this project or anything else people are doing, I would say, just as a lifelong Philadelphian, my hope is that we bring our questions, we bring our vision, we bring our skepticism, and we think about the multiplicity of stories in the city. One thing I would love to see is that, that there are partnerships that exist from this project that Philadelphia 250 is running and others, and also recognize what is possible, what is not possible. But at every point, hearing those questions is a form of evolving and growing as a city.
And keep in mind, Philadelphia always roots for an underdog.
The other thing I'd say is, as I'm listening to all of this, there's a short-term view and a long-term view in all of this. 2026, for all intensive purposes, in my humble opinion, is around the corner. If you're not planning now, it's going to be challenging to achieve whatever it is that you hope to gain. But the long-term view is, again, it's not just about monuments, it's not about buildings like the Mann Center. It's about the people, frankly, who come and live and experience what those things are, whether it's a neighborhood project, whether it's we haven't even talked about tech or technological ways to share this celebration with the world. We are at a different inflection point now with all of our technical capacities and social media and everything else, online, virtual, you name it. So I think there's a long-term view here. It's not just 2026. I think that's a catalyst. But I think it's the long-term view of where can 2026 catapult us to a longer view for the betterment of Philadelphia, and to share what makes the city very special on an international stage, because it's not just about Philadelphia. We live in a world now that is much broader, and we're all connected in different ways.
That's great. This seems like the perfect place to end this particular part of the afternoon, but please stick around. We're going to shuffle off the stage here, and Eric DeVera will come up and help to answer some of the questions that you all asked. Please ask those again, and also any other questions about how the process is going to work. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Eric DeVera. I'm the Leave a Legacy project manager. And to introduce real quick Leave a Legacy, it is going to be a quick two-part process for all of our applicants. Part one, it's all online. Part one will focus on the project itself, as well as how it exemplifies Philadelphia 250's values, which is shared prosperity, people's histories, revolutionary actions in pursuit of happiness. So that focus of part one can either be actually written out or actually even an upload video. Second part, part two, is where we focus and dig a little deeper onto your project, understand what you define as success, what you define as the resources you need for your project to be a success, as well as understand why you and your team are the people to do it and make that and accomplish that project by 2026. So that's what that two-part process is. And for the folks even at home, if you were not able to be here with us today, there will be a couple more information workshops coming up for the next 2 months. The deadline is May 20th for your full submission. We ask you that, apply soon and apply early. We will constantly be checking, reviewing any of those proposals. And so to answer your question as far as the review process, it will be a mix of our task force as well as some external folks that have expertise in public work. So our focus for these projects, again, they can be activities, programs, initiatives. They can be from the people. Again, I'd like to stress this Philadelphia 250, we are by the people for all people. So you do not have to be an established organization to be able to submit to this project. At the beginning of all of this, we plan for our reviewers to go through an orientation and training with our DEIA consultant to make sure that everyone coming in, as we review every single project, that we are not coming in with bias at all. I know that is a hard promise, but that is what we promise you. May 1st, we're encouraging everyone to take part in part one through May 1st. Like I said, we are reviewing it weekly. Then you will get a green light to go ahead and start part two. And we want to give you as much time as possible for part two for that review process as well. Give you time because we want to understand where you are, how it's going to happen, because we want to be here to support you. And then, thankfully to our folks at the Knight Foundation, the Philadelphia Foundation, there will be a stipend for up to 16 teams to be part of our incubation phase, which is August through December. And that is a time where if your project is not fully developed, we will help you. We want to get you there so that at the end of 2022, we will have our 4 legacy projects that will move on and that we will steward for the next 4 years, and to make sure and see that will be happening. Again, throughout the process, as mentioned, we will make all of the submissions in part one available in public because we're hoping to see and encourage everyone to begin partnering together, because you could have an idea down in South Philly as well as in the Northeast that are the same. So how can we work together to make all this possible? So we are really looking forward to all the synergies that'll come out of this. Okay, we're gonna move over to the workshop, but before I do that, I'd like to encourage you and give a shout out to Interface Studio Architects for our stoop, so make sure to get a picture right over there before you leave today. But otherwise, I'm gonna hand it off to our facilitator for our workshop, Bobby Block.